Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency, here to talk for a little while about lifeboat regions. That's a different term from a climate destination, right? Let me explain. So as we look around America in the NCA 5, seeing how America's climate is projected to change by 2C, and just as a note on that, as I'm filming today, we've had another monthly bulletin come in from the Copernicus Institute showing that November of 2024 was about 1.6 over the pre-industrial average. It's quite possible that 2024 as a whole will come in closer to 1.6 than 1.5. Little closer to 2C than I would like to be, that's for sure. So even as we face the reality of these rapid change conditions, if you look at the 2C projections for the US, we can see that a majority of folks, could very reasonably plan to stay in their homes if they build resilience during these times of change. I think a lot of the way we talk about climate in the news, it gives everyone the impression that they're in immediate physical danger all the time. But although you are allowed a little existential dread around climate, like for a treat, the reality is that most of us in the US are not in immediate danger from climate change most of the time. We're not in immediate physical danger most of the time. And that's not true everywhere. We're fortunate here. Having a reasonable analysis of how much personal risk you are facing is important to unlock your potential to action. And, as we look towards 2C, there are some parts of the country that do look rough. It is extremely likely we are going to see 2C conditions in our lifetime. The government of France has been so alarmed by these recent changes, the 23-24 bump that we're noticing here, that they've decided they're going to get France in shape for 2C by the 2030s. If you're living in inland Southern California, California's Central Valley, basically all of Arizona, most of Texas, and most of Arkansas, I see you as being in a high-risk area as we move towards 2C. That's because those are the parts of the country facing unusually large hot season increases, like 50 plus additional days over 95, 20 plus additional days over 105 in some of those areas. If I lived in those areas, I'd be very concerned about my household in the event of an extended power failure. And if I wanted to stay, I would build resilience against heat. Arkansas, I'm not saying you're turning Arizona hot. I'm saying you've got an especially difficult situation because you've got overlapping threats, a triple threat of heat, fire, and storms. And some big storms are heading our way, America. We felt them this year for sure. During hurricane season, we expect to see more storms hitting Big Bend in Florida, and we expect to see more inland hurricanes bringing disaster conditions to Georgia and the Carolinas. We're expecting Tornado Alley to shift east, bringing an unfamiliar threat into communities east of Ohio. And speaking of fire, we are expecting wildfire threats to emerge in new areas. Up north in the North Woods of Minnesota, it's a very serious concern, threatening communities, especially people who practice traditional life ways based on manoomin, wild rice. You can learn more about this lifeway, which allows people from many ethnic backgrounds to sustainably support their families today by checking out this video on the channel. There's still hope for the manoomin lifeway, but only if we face the reality of change and find ways to respond. Around the hand of Michigan, conditions may be changing too fast for many of America's most beautiful fruit orchards to survive in their current form. Farmers are working to put in new tree varieties now. They're working to adapt to a future with warmer winters, which can cause big reductions in fruit and nut production. And foresters throughout the northern Midwest are helping native tree species move north to the shifting edges of their range to reduce the threat of fire and keep up our precious tree canopy. The Forest Service is doing this work today. In the West, we've seen terrible fires emerge already in the last 20 years. That risk is continuing to spread, and as we look to a 2C future, the Idaho-Montana border looks likely to face some very serious wildfires. If we prepare, we can protect our homes. And this Thursday, December 12th, I'm going to have a video that I'll share with an architect with practical information about how to protect your home from a wildfire. I'm reviewing a lot of upsetting stuff here in the Outlook, but I'm not saying any of it to scare you. So please don't get upset. Everywhere you are, there's some kind of increasing challenge in the Outlook. Everywhere you are, there's something we need to brace up against. The state of California was hit by fire so hard already, and they've learned important lessons from their fight. The state of California is teaching many important practices that can save our homes and our communities from fire. If you live in an area that never sees tornadoes, you're probably really scared of tornadoes. But if you talk to someone like me who lives in an area where tornadoes are a regular occurrence, you'll find that we respect them. We might feel a healthy fear, but we know how to respond. It changes the profile of your fear when you know how to respond to a threat. A lot of the threats that are coming our way, building resilience is a healthy response. If tougher times are coming, we can get tough. I think this is the framing that we need as I talk about lifeboats instead of destinations. There are plenty of places you could move for climate that are nice, dozens and dozens of possible great destinations. The lifeboats that I'm talking about today are more than destinations. They're the two best areas in the US for overall stability beyond 2C, as well as for enduring the likely impacts of AMOC collapse. What I'm talking about there with AMOC collapse is a change in the circulation patterns of the Atlantic Ocean that we may experience in our lifetimes. Some people think AMOC collapse may trigger a new ice age. Our northern ice is looking pretty melted, so I guess that's a thumbs up situation. But if that is what happens, and we have uncertainty in this high change time, the glaciers aren't going to cover the land in 3 days. We'd be talking about a generational pace of ice change. Although some of the lifeboats are in areas that have seen glaciation, I don't think that that takes them out of lifeboat status because we're talking about a reality where we're going to continue to experience high rates of change going well into the future. The lifeboats are defined the way that they are, not just because they have this bimodular stability, but because they have capacity. There's room in the lifeboats. There's water in the lifeboats and enough growing capacity to support more people. You could be a help if you move to one of these regions. You could be part of a good path forward. These are places where we could cultivate biodiversity. A lot of life forms are working to get into these regions. We see new species showing up all the time. And I think it's important to say that that's what this is about as we're thinking about the lifeboats. These are places to build a lifeway, to build a culture where we embrace our role in the circle of life, which is not as the center of the circle, but as a tender of the circle. The lifeboats I see as places to stand up for life. Their conventional agricultural potential is not fantastic. Their ability to be cultivated for tourism, not great. If you want a fun, fabulous retirement, someplace warm, but not like on fire, you want to talk about climate destinations. And there are plenty of places where I think you can have a nice 10, 20 years, even the way things are looking. There's nice destinations in many parts of the country. If you want to become an ancestor, you want to consider the lifeboats. These areas are boring, low cost of living areas where instead of thinking about development and building the economy, we could be protecting soil and water, building food systems and communities, and cultivating biodiversity. I would say that is the work of those of us who want to become ancestors. Now, here's something important I want you to understand. The lifeboats are not the only good places. The lifeboats are not the only places with sustainable futures. No way. The lifeboats are regions with great cross-model stability and intake capacity. Those of you who have been with us for a while, you know I've spent a fair amount of time in the West, and I have a regard for drylands. Would a woman with a regard for drylands send out a mass communication? Here are the stable desert areas? Oh, that would be a harmful thing to do. That would be a harmful thing to do to those jewels of stability scattered over the desert West. Drylands are low capacity, so we don't talk about them as a destination on the channel. For drylands information, you're going to want to study, and you can always reach out to me after you get some ideas. Capacity in some parts of the West, the dry parts of the West, it's small. Capacity in some parts of the West, say up in the Bay Area, now, and that's an area with a pretty stable climate outlook. And then you go up the coast, blooming into Western Washington, there's plenty of water in that area. You're talking about a rich, beautiful land. But let's be honest, you can't call the Bay Area a lifeboat. There's people in the streets in the Bay Area sleeping on them. I would not recommend anybody move to the Bay Area as a destination because it's impossible to afford and the competition is so intense. Washington, too, it's very expensive. The competition is very intense. If you're wealthy, you have some family connection, knock yourself out. These places are beautiful. They have long-term futures potential. There will likely be more fires in Washington than any of us would like to imagine, but there's a future there after the fires, too. In my first series, I had parts of Oregon and Washington designated as a good place to move for climate. But that was a couple of years ago, and things are changing quick. The Pacific Northwest isn't off of this video. It's not off the lifeboat list because it's bad. It's just not a lifeboat because I think it's pretty full. And that's one of the most important things about how I'm defining the lifeboat regions is if they have intake capacity. Now let's talk about Lifeboat 1 in the northern Midwest and Lifeboat 2 towards the Northeast. I'm going to do some regional overviews for everyone, including AMOC modeling like this video has, so don't worry. You're going to get a chance to learn more about your home from this kind of cross-model perspective. All right, here's Lifeboat 1. Is it fun and sexy? No. If you come here, and I live down on the southern border of Lifeboat 1, I can warn you, we really do put tater tots in casseroles. It can be potentially disturbing and slimy to the uninitiated. Particular threats in Lifeboat 1 include the line of storms. Let's check that out. Here in figure 2.12, we can zoom in here. We see a line of high risk for extreme precipitation events extending just a little bit focused south of the Minnesota-Iowa border and going into Wisconsin. I have clipped off parts of Wisconsin closest to the lake because of how conserved the threat is in that part of Wisconsin closest to the lake. So again, within this overall well-conserved region, you've got concerns about extreme rain focused in that danger line, as well as smoke danger from the north, although our direct risk of fire is not huge. But there's more smoke. It's going to be a risk everywhere. An energy-efficient air purifier is an important resilience purchase for every household. They don't have to be that expensive. I got my family's air purifier for under $100, and it keeps a large area clean. For the astute listener, you may have just heard me describe the first of Lifeboat 1's projected great features, not being on fire. And I can tell you, we've got a lot of other great regular stuff that used to not be special or exciting at all, like large areas with clean water, great soil, and excellent baseline air quality. It's not too gloomy either. In the southwest quadrant of Lifeboat 1 especially, the winters are often bright, with pleasant sun even in the cold. There's also no serious threat of earthquakes. We'll just pop that up so that you can see Lifeboat 1 kind of in this area, real low earthquakes. Lifeboat 2 you're going to see is over here, also a very low earthquake pocket. So don't get me wrong. There's good stuff outside the lifeboat. I got to draw the borders somewhere. Those are your load change borders. It doesn't mean that stuff that falls outside of that area is bad. It can be great, like Chicago. Chicago is a great city. It's been engaged in climate work since 2008, which is very early for a major city worldwide to have begun climate action. The outlook's good there too. It's just not as stable as in the square of Lifeboat 1. You're talking about picking up a bit more heat, which some people, the fact that it gets super cold is what's been keeping Chicago off their list. Let's look at Lifeboat 2. So Lifeboat 2, here we're talking about a comparable sized area in New York State and Pennsylvania. There are great looking parts of southern Vermont and western Massachusetts, but Massachusetts is going to have to pay for Boston's sea level rise challenges, and Vermont, I hear, is just about full. So those areas, while fabulous in and of themselves, are outside the borders of Lifeboat 2. And as you can see on the graphic, am I saying that Rochester is bad? No, I'm saying that it is a little bit higher change than inside those squiggly borders of Lifeboat 2. Lifeboat 2 is a little more polluted than some parts of Lifeboat 1. The water cycle looks a little bit less exciting. There's not as much extreme rain signal. That may add to Lifeboat 2's appeal. We've always had a lot of big storms in the Midwest, and we're known to have a more intense multi-year drought cycle than you see in this part of the Northeast. So I see the amped up seasonal storms as a big part of the Lifeboat 1 challenge, Lifeboat 2, as you may kind of get the hint from the degree of squiggliness we're dealing with here, it's more about microclimate cultivation and differences on the earth rather than differences coming from the sky. Your overall rate of change is a little bit higher in Lifeboat 2 than Lifeboat 1. There's more topography, and life forms are going to be moving around kind of a lot in this region. That being said, Lifeboat 2 has many of the same charms as Lifeboat 1. Minimally on fire, and here you're talking about a forested region, not so much a grasslands region where you really like not being on fire. Also, as you saw in that earthquake figure, not an earthquakey area, and you're safe from the sea, because who knows what the sea is going to do anymore. And I'll admit, I have a little bit of an overstated fear of the sea. It's just part of being me that I'm kind of afraid of the sea and I'm outrageously scared of tsunamis, specifically the West Coast mega tsunami. We know from ancient records in both Japan and North America, we're due for a big shake and a big wave. The wave has come about every 300, 350 years. And like this timeline, we're all living in it, right? You could say this timeline has a sense of humor if you like that old school Three Stooges type thing where you just get keeping punched in the face by way of a joke, right? It feels like we could have a bad week where everything goes off at once. So if you want to avoid as many of those one-off big threats as possible, if you're moving for climate and you want a place that's just regular, low rate of change, if you want to grow stuff, you want low rate of change, I would say get in the boats. Let's pop up Lifeboat 1 again. If you like prairie, if you want to live a lifeway that's probably going to have a higher proportion of grazing lands, of animal products in the lifeway, if you want maximum boredom, you want Lifeboat 1. I love it. Max me out on the boredom scale. Over the 4 states in Lifeboat 1, you got some really big differences in state laws on important topics, from what you can do with your body to what you can do with your land, regulations about guns, regulations about water and water storage. There's a big range of state regulations that are worth looking into as you make your choice in the big square land area here where things will change a little more slowly than much of the rest of the country. I mean, a lot of the ways where I live, it's still 1995, which I think is nice. In Lifeboat 1, we do have some topography. If you look over here, this is the driftless area where we've got most of our topography. It gets hilly there. There's some karst geography, but a lot of Lifeboat 1 is very flat to meandering. And what we've got a lot of is sky. If you like looking at the sky like I do, if you like a big sky, big sunsets, especially the southwest part of Lifeboat 1, is going to get more and more like the west if these projections all hold. If you prefer a little more topography in your life, Lifeboat 2 has much more forested topography, a lot more little creeks and streams, nice, interesting lakes. That means more life bouncing around trying to find a home and more work for you as your microclimate changes. But some people prefer that. Some people can't commit to the most fully boring experience. Although I will say, my friends in New York State insist that their communities are also very boring, even though they do come with fancy rocks. Whatever, guys. In terms of legal range, there's a lot less investigation to do. You're talking New York laws or Pennsylvania laws. Those states do have a lot of differences in their laws, so it's worth looking into as you think about where you might want to build in. It's also worth noting, New York State is going to be paying for New York City turning into a funky urban water world. Inland New York looks really quite nice, really quite good climate stability. New York City is facing a high rate of change. It's like taking the whole state's rate of change. It's looking to get surprisingly warm there as we approach 2C. A lot of the overall projections show it heading like in a New Orleans direction in terms of climate. And the sea level rise impacts on New York City and nearby New Jersey are going to be pretty wild. So I would not be surprised if state level services got kind of thin in New York as these situations escalate. Folks, I'm going to be real with you. If you want to maximize your generational future possibilities, the lifeboats are my top general recommends. But there's nothing that can make us perfectly safe. At a certain point, everything comes down to grace. This is just about doing the best we can. And as I think about how to live my life in these times of change, where there's less and less certainty, I want to live a human life, a life with other living things. I find a life where I cultivate life addresses something essential about what it means to be human. If this is the time we have, I want to make it good. And this is an important time to build up the great storehouse of life, our precious soil, which can be a powerful gift to the future, no matter what the future looks like. And the regional outlooks to follow, we'll talk about other nice places. Places with some capacity worth examining, places where I think a totally reasonable person could move for climate and have a pretty good shot. Good shot at building a generational future. I see that in Northeast Kentucky. I see that in great pockets all along Appalachia. Up in the Northeast, plenty of good territory. Dakotas and Montana, really standout opportunities up there. And I'll strongly highlight the get out zones of each region, just like how I pointed out that line of storms that's dangerous within Lifeboat 1 as we tour around, with an eye to multiple modeling scenarios. But if you're really listening to me, I hope you understand. We need to accept that we're moving into a more uncertain future. It's going to get weird. Even in the lowest change areas, there is no perfect choice. There's no perfect solution. If you're living in a place where your gut says it's time to go, you should trust your gut. There's already a big difference in how it feels on the ground right now in a high change versus a low change area. If you're sensitive to such things, and they're the kind of things a person can learn how to see, you can learn how to see how much dead wood is in a forest. You can learn how to see if a forest has any young trees or not, or if it's just got invasives understory. You can see if a landscape is healthy, if there's good biodiversity in an area, or if everything is overrun by one or two invasive species. You can use your senses and you can tell. If you go visit a lower change area, you'll be able to tell if you're in a good place if you pay attention to the biodiversity and the health of the landscape. If you learn how to see other living things. In this analysis series, this looking at regions in light of multiple converging models, I wanted to put the big ones out front. Stay out of line of storms in Lifeboat 1, stay out of Superfund sites in Lifeboat 2. If you want to maximize your odds, I would say this is a good time to get to ground and plant some stuff. I would especially recommend shrubs. Fruiting shrubs, they're really great at not getting blown over in a big storm like how a tree would. I think it's boring enough in both of these large regions that I described today, both of the Lifeboat regions, that you got a shot about keeping one foot in front of the other. I think they're both boring enough that maybe you can stay out of trouble. It's worth noting, life is not all about shrubs and gardening. We need a lot of skills to build a lifeway. Think about how you could help. Let's get ready. Hey folks, thanks for watching. I want to take a moment to say thank you to the AR community, to the donors, to the volunteers, to everyone spreading the word online, and especially to everyone doing the work in your households and on the ground. It's thanks to all of you that I can keep doing this work, and I'm so grateful for your support. I'm glad to be getting ready with you, and I look forward to talking with you all again soon.